Ever wish there was like a faster way to really make changes stick, in your life? Well, today we're diving deep into advanced conversational hypnosis. Specifically, this method called emotional trance that honestly just might be the key. We'll be exploring the work of Virginie. She's an expert in this, and trust me, her techniques are fascinating.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. What I find really intriguing about Imir's approach is how she really tunes into those really subtle, often overlooked cues, the kind that reveal what's happening in the subconscious mind. She actually calls them unconscious moments, and they're like these little windows into a person's deeper thoughts and
So
feelings.
no like stereotypical swinging pocket watch here.
Right.
It's more about reading between the lines of everyday conversation.
Exactly. Imer's training really stresses how these unconscious moments can show up in all kinds of ways. Visually, someone's body language, even their tone of voice, and even like in the seemingly random comments, the kind that contradict what they just said.
It's funny, I was just reading about how much of our communication is nonverbal. Just makes you wonder what we're sending out without even realizing it. So, like, what specifically should we be looking out for?
Well, imagine you're talking with someone. They suddenly shift their posture, maybe cross their arms, or like fidget with their hands, or their voice gets a little higher when they talk about a certain topic. Even a sigh can be significant, believe it or not. Those are all potential unconscious moments that a skilled conversational hypnotist would pick up on.
Wow. Almost like our bodies are trying to tell us something, even if we're not consciously aware of it. Imer thinks these moments are especially valuable in hypnosis.
Absolutely. These unconscious moments, they can be super valuable in guiding someone into a trance, that state where real transformation can happen. And one of the most interesting techniques that she teaches is called trans-emotional.
Transemotional, gotta admit, sounds a little intimidating. Can you break that down for us? What is that?
Essentially, it's about recognizing and working with the actual physical sensations that usually go along with emotional issues. Aymir really believes that the body holds a lot of wisdom. And by tuning into these physical sensations, we can get to these deeper levels of awareness and healing.
So instead of just talking about a problem, you're feeling it in your body.
Exactly. Aimia has some really cool examples in her training. For instance, she talks about working with this client, Sophie. She felt this tightness in her chest every time her father came up. And as they explored it further, Sophie was like, it feels like a heavy weight, symbolizing, that burden of their strained relationship. And as she worked through that feeling in her body, she started to feel lighter, more at peace, even though their relationship hadn't actually changed.
So just by focusing on the physical sensation, she could shift how she felt about it. Even if the situation stayed the same, it's like bypassing the mental stuff and going right to the source of the problem.
Exactly. That's the cool thing about the trans-emotional technique. You can access and process emotions on a deeper, more like visceral level. And it's not about denying or suppressing feelings either. It's more about understanding and transforming them, through the body.
This is really fascinating. So Imer sees Transinfotional as a quicker path to lasting change, right?
She does.
Yeah.
And her reasoning is really interesting. See, by working directly with the body and the subconscious mind, she thinks it's totally possible to make these profound shifts in how we see things and how we behave. And way faster than with traditional talk therapy, which mostly focuses on the conscious mind.
So instead of spending years analyzing the past or like reasoning your way out of negative patterns, you could get to the root of it and experience relief a lot quicker. That's a really powerful idea.
Sure.
What kind of physical sensations are we talking about here? Is it always like a tightness in the chest? Or are there other examples?
It could really be anything. Amir highlights that. She had this one client, George, who talked about this feeling of heat in his head whenever he felt stressed. And another one, Lena, felt a tingling in her arms whenever her job came up. These are just a few examples, but the main thing is that any unusual or persistent physical sensation could be a valuable clue to what's going on beneath the surface.
That's really interesting. Makes you want to pay closer attention to your own body's signals, doesn't it?
It really does, and that's one of the most valuable things I've learned from Imir's work. The importance of honoring those messages our bodies are sending us. They often hold the key to deeper understanding and healing.
It's wild to think those random physical sensations could actually be our bodies trying to like talk to us on a deeper level. I'm already thinking about what mine might be saying. But before we, go too far down that rabbit hole, how do these unconscious moments play out in an actual hypnosis session? Is it like directly addressing them? Or are they more kind of like subtle guideposts for the hypnotist?
That's a great question. Imir's approach is really all about using those moments to deepen the trance and kind of guide the client towards, resolving things. It's not necessarily about confronting the client about like they're fidgeting or sighing, but more about subtly acknowledging it in a way that encourages their subconscious to open up more.
So you're creating a safe space for the client to, like, explore those feelings
Yeah.
without feeling pressured or judged.
That's it. Eimer actually calls it validating and ratifying the unconscious moment. So, for example, if you've got a client who keeps touching their throat when they're talking about like a tough conversation, the hypnotist might say, I notice you're touching your throat. What sensations are you experiencing there?
It's interesting how such a simple thing can be so powerful.
Oh, it really can. Just by acknowledging the unconscious moment, you're basically saying to their subconscious, hey, I see you, I hear you, and it's totally okay to feel however you're feeling. That validation creates a sense of safety and trust, which lets the client relax and, go deeper into that hypnotic state.
And that deeper state is where the real work happens, right?
Exactly. Imir really emphasizes that once the client is in that deeper trance, the hypnotist's role changes. It goes from actively leading the conversation to just witnessing and supporting the client's own process.
Less about directing and more about creating this space for, like, their inner wisdom to kind of come out.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. At that point, the hypnotist might just offer a few gentle prompts, maybe repeat some keywords that came up. But the magic really happens when the client's subconscious takes over.
It's a delicate dance, isn't it? Between guiding and letting go. And this kind of brings us back to the trans-emotional thing.
Hmm.
How does the hypnotist use this approach to help the client, like, work through those deeper emotions and actually find resolution?
You got it. Remember, transemotional is about focusing on those physical sensations and letting them kind of evolve naturally. The hypnotist might just direct the client's attention to it, encourage them to describe it. Where is it? What's the shape? The color? Does it have a temperature, a texture? Anything like that.
So it's like you're helping them translate, their body's language into something they can understand. And by focusing on that, you're going deeper past all the mental stuff.
Exactly. And Eimer suggests that this actually speeds up the whole healing process. Instead of spending months or even years just talking about the problem, the client can, experience this big shift in perception and understanding in just one session.
That's pretty amazing. Got any examples of how that might look in a real session?
Absolutely. Eimer talks about this one client who was struggling with a huge fear of failure, like deep-seated. And during the session, the client mentioned this knot in their stomach. Every time they thought about an upcoming presentation at work, they'd feel it.
So instead of trying to figure out the fear, they were encouraged to just, like, be with it in their body.
You got it.
Mm.
And as they focused on that knot in their stomach, they started seeing it differently. It was like this tangled ball of yarn. And each strand of yarn represented a past experience of failing, or being criticized. With the hypnotist's help, the client started untangling it, releasing each strand as they forgave themselves for those past mistakes and acknowledged that they were, worthy.
That's such a powerful image.
Yeah.
And as they untangled that yarn, did that feeling in their stomach start to go away?
It did. The knot loosened up and eventually disappeared completely.
Yeah.
And their fear of failure, it went with it. They felt lighter, more confident, ready to tackle that presentation without all that anxiety holding them back.
It's crazy how something so simple can have such a big impact. What if the client doesn't feel anything specific during the session? Can the trans-emotionality thing still work?
That's a really good question, and Eimer talks about that too. She says even small sensations can be valuable, like a change in temperature, a feeling of pressure, things like that.
So it's about paying attention to any changes, no matter how small they are.
Yeah.
Seems like it takes a lot of sensitivity from the hypnotist.
Oh, it definitely does. But Eimer believes anyone can learn to recognize these unconscious moments. It just takes practice and a willingness to listen to yourself and to your client.
This is all so insightful. But how can our listeners who aren't hypnotists use this? Is there a way to tap into that power of trans-emotional without a formal hypnosis session?
That is a fantastic question, and it's something we can definitely explore further.
So we've been talking about these subtle unconscious moments and how they can be used in hypnosis to create, lasting change. It's all super fascinating. But I think our listeners are probably wondering, like, how can they apply this in their own lives, even if they aren't, hypnotists themselves?
You're right. That's a great point. You don't have to be a trained hypnotist to benefit from this stuff. Eimer's work has a lot of valuable tools for anyone who wants to understand themselves better and, make some positive changes from the inside out.
So how can we start tapping into that power of the subconscious and, like, the body's wisdom without needing a hypnotist there to guide us?
Well, one of the simplest but most powerful things. Start paying attention to your own physical sensations. Especially when you're feeling, really emotional. Notice what's happening in your body when you're stressed, anxious, even when you're happy. Where do you feel it? What's it like?
It's like we become detectives of our own inner world.
Yeah,
But instead of thinking about our thoughts, we're tuning into our bodies.
exactly. And just like the hypnotist validates and ratifies those unconscious moments in a client, you can do that for yourself. Just acknowledge those sensations. No judgment. Don't push them away. Don't overthink it. Just observe them. Be curious. Be open to it.
Okay, so like if I notice my chest feels tight when I'm thinking about a deadline, instead of freaking out, I just say to myself, all right, there's that tightness again. Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can explore it a little more. What's it feel like? Does it have a shape, a color? Is it hot, cold, anything like that? Does it remind you of anything?
So as you're exploring those sensations, could you use a technique like, the trans-emotional method to process them?
Oh, absolutely. The main thing with transemotional is letting those sensations just evolve naturally, trusting that your body knows what it's doing. It has its own way of healing. So you don't have to force a solution. Just give those sensations space to do their thing and see what happens.
So it's like mindfulness, but focused on the physical, not just the mental.
That's a great way to put it. And just like mindfulness, the more you practice this self-awareness, the more you'll pick up on your body's signals. You'll start noticing patterns, and you get a better understanding of how your emotions, show up in your body.
And then you can start dealing with those emotional issues at their root instead of just the symptoms.
That's it. Remember Sophie, the client with the tight chest when she thought about her father. Exploring that sensation with transemotional helped her change how she felt about it, even though the situation with her father didn't actually change.
It's pretty amazing that we can make such big changes in ourselves just by paying attention to our bodies and, trusting our own inner wisdom.
It really is, and I think that's the biggest takeaway from Imir's work. It reminds us that we don't always need outside solutions or fancy therapies. Sometimes the answers are already there, inside us. We just gotta find them.
Wow, so much to think about. This has been such a fascinating dive into emotional trance hypnosis. I know I'm going to be paying a lot more attention to those little whispers from my subconscious from now on.
Me too. And who knows what incredible changes are waiting for us when we start really listening to what our bodies are telling us.
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Huge thanks to all our listeners for joining us. Catch you next time.